They laughed because she misspelled one word, but when she rewrote that proof alone at 2 a.m., MIT was never the same. "You can't even spell matrix," he said. "And you think you belong at MIT?" Claire Donovan didn't respond. She rarely did. She sat in the middle row of the packed auditorium, notebook open, pen poised, face unreadable. But something in her clenched. Around her, laughter echoed. Nervous laughter. The kind that tried to hide discomfort. A few students chuckled because they didn't want to seem too serious. A few others just looked away. At the front of the room stood Professor Martin Heller, known across campus for his brilliance and for the sharp edge he carried like a second tie. His lectures in advanced linear systems were ruthless, fast-paced, and filled to the brim every semester. He didn't remember most students' names. He didn't need to. They remembered his. Claire hadn't expected to be called out, but she had made a mistake, a spelling mistake, 3 times in a single problem set. And at MIT, where your worth wasn't your story but your syntax, it mattered. Heller held up her paper like a trophy of failure. MIT prides itself on precision. So tell me, how do you decompose something you can't even spell? Her name was at the top, Claire Donovan. The moment etched itself into something harder than embarrassment. It didn't break her. It focused her. That night, Claire skipped her job at the library cafe. She walked instead to Building 4, the old computer lab no one used anymore. She sat beneath the flickering light and pulled out her spiral notebook, the same one with bent corners and faded sketches. She rewrote the entire proof. Not just fixing spelling errors. She rebuilt the logic, cleaned the structure, layered the recursion model she had quietly designed over the summer while working late shifts and eating cheap noodles. She had never had a mentor, never taken a formal research class. But she knew what she was doing, even if her sneakers were held together with duct tape. At 2:34 a.m., she saved the file, finaldraft.pdf, and emailed it to herself. Then she sat in the glow of the outdated screen, stared at her inbox, and waited for a reply that wouldn't come. The next morning, she walked past a bulletin board in the math department. A flyer hung crookedly between old announcements. MIT Undergraduate Math Symposium. Call for papers. Independent submissions. Welcome. The deadline was 10 days away. No advisor required. She stared at the flyer for a long time. She didn't know what she was doing. But something in her said, "Do it. Now." That night, she uploaded the proof. No edits, no explanation, no apology, just sent it. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Professor Heller had submitted a paper too. Same topic, same structure, same deadline. He had spent 6 months preparing his. Claire's arrived first. 3 days passed. Nothing. She returned to her class. Sat quietly. Heller didn't look at her. Not even once. Not to gloat. Not to scold. Not even to acknowledge she existed. It should have made her feel safe. Instead, it made her feel invisible. Again. She checked her email every hour. Nothing. No confirmation. No rejection. Just silence. By day 6, she began to believe she had done something wrong. Maybe the file didn't upload. Maybe the typo girl was being quietly deleted. Maybe it was all just noise. On the evening of day 7, she worked an extra custodial shift for cash. Janitor overalls, hair tied back, eyes tired. It was late. Most buildings were dark. She was mopping the hall in the admin wing when a door opened. It was Professor Omar Klein, one of the symposium judges. He was on the phone, walking quickly, distracted. No, it was submitted without faculty endorsement, he said. Yes, I double-checked. Claire Donovan. No advisor on record. No mentorship either. But the math is shockingly good. He walked past her without realizing, then paused, looked back. Their eyes met. Claire said nothing, just kept mopping. But her hands were shaking. He didn't say anything, just nodded. That night she didn't sleep. Again. But not because of shame. Because she finally knew they were talking about her. And Professor Heller was not happy about it. In a third-floor lounge the next evening, Claire walked past another half-open door. Two voices echoed. That proof. It reads like doctoral work, Klein said. Did you coach her? No, Heller's voice replied, clipped. But she's in your class. Yes. Then how did she do this? Silence. Then Heller said, darkly, she must have copied it. That kind of recursion doesn't come from nowhere. Have you found a match? Not yet. Claire walked away. Not because she was afraid, because she was furious. The next morning, her email pinged. Subject, Academic Review, Urgent. She read the line 3 times. The girl who couldn't spell matrix was now being asked to prove she didn't steal her own work. And Claire? She would, not for them. For her mother. For the girl who whispered formulas into mop water. For the loop that closed perfectly. Whether or not anyone was watching, Claire had submitted the proof 4 days ago. No edits, no introduction. Just a file called Final Draft, with a time stamp that didn't care how worn her shoes were or how recently she had cried. Her inbox, however, remained unbothered by the gravity of the moment. No confirmation, no rejection, no recognition, just silence. On the 5th morning, she woke before her alarm, stared at the ceiling of her dorm room, and listened to the faint rumble of pipes behind the walls. Her roommate, Maya, was still asleep, headphones pressed into her curls, breathing even. Claire sat up and reached for the drawer she still hadn't opened, the one with her mother's letter. She didn't touch it, just stared at the edge of the paper peeking out from its envelope. Not yet. At 8:17 a.m., Claire walked into the math department building. No one looked at her. No one said her name. The flyer was still there, now slightly curled at the edges. Her paper had been submitted, but the fear hadn't left. If anything, it had morphed into something worse. Doubt. That evening, she picked up a second custodial shift. Not because she needed the cash, though she did, but because she needed the noise of the vacuum more than the silence of not knowing. The buffer of doing something. Anything. Near the end of her shift, she passed Professor Heller's office. The lights were off, but his door was ajar. On his desk sat a folder. Thick, labeled in small black print, Symposium Submission, Recursive Decomposition, Heller, M. She didn't stop, but her heart did. He had submitted on the same topic. Back in her dorm, Claire stood in front of the bathroom mirror brushing her teeth with mechanical rhythm. The reflection stared back, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. She wanted to believe her work would speak louder than his name, but she'd seen how the world worked. The next morning brought a weather shift. Cambridge woke under overcast skies and wind sharp enough to sting. Claire sat in the cafe where she worked part-time, pouring espresso shots for midterm weary students while trying not to spill foamed milk on her own fingers. Then something happened. A TA named Jonah, whom Claire recognized from Heller's class, walked in and whispered something to another TA. They both turned and glanced her way. Jonah muttered, "It's her, the Matrix girl." Claire blinked, pretending not to hear, but her chest tightened. Not from shame, from certainty. They knew. Later that afternoon, she wandered into the student lounge in Building 3 and collapsed into a sagging couch. She was sipping instant ramen broth from a paper cup when a message pinged her phone. Unknown. Number: Are you free for a quick meeting tomorrow? Professor Omar Klein. Claire stared at it for a long time. No subject, no threat, just a request. She typed slowly. Yes. What time? His reply was instant. 10 a.m., room 2218. She didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, Claire showed up to room 2218 5 minutes early. The hallway was quiet, her boots barely making a sound on the linoleum. She held her notebook close, the one with recursive loops drawn during lunch breaks and solutions scrawled between cafe shifts. Professor Klein sat behind a modest desk. Beside him was another professor Claire didn't recognize. Thin glasses, weathered blazer, eyes sharp but kind. Miss Donovan, Klein said, gesturing to the seat. Thank you for coming. Claire nodded and sat. We've been reviewing your symposium submission, he continued. It's impressive. She stayed silent. Dr. Miriam Hayes here is also on the review panel. Claire, Hayes said gently, we'd like to know more about how you developed this method. Claire looked down at her notebook. Then she opened it. I didn't learn it from a class, she said. Over the summer, I was experimenting with recursive decompositions. The rotations didn't align under standard basis transforms, so I layered them. Not neatly, but it worked. Hayes leaned in, intrigued. You layered the recursion under constraint shifts? Claire nodded. And you didn't have any guidance on this? No, Claire said. Just trial and error. A lot of error. They exchanged glances. Klein finally said, Do you know Professor Heller also submitted on the same topic? I figured, Claire answered. He paused. Your submission was received 2 days before his. Another pause. We're not accusing you of anything, Hayes said, but you should be aware. The optics are delicate. Claire straightened her shoulders. I didn't take anything. I didn't even know he was working on it. Klein nodded slowly. That's what we hope to hear. And honestly, your structure is cleaner. Claire blinked. What? His is more formal, but yours breathes. It moves. A silence filled the room, not hostile, but heavy. Klein folded his hands. We're recommending you as a featured presenter. Claire's pulse jumped. The final decision isn't made yet, Hayes added, but we thought you should know. And, Claire? She looked up. Don't let the system shrink you. That night she walked back to Building 4. Same flickering light, same cracked tile by the door. She sat at the terminal where she'd submitted the file, and for the first time, she allowed herself to breathe. Just for a moment. The silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the pause between lightning and thunder, too quiet to trust. For 3 days after her meeting with Professors Klein and Hayes, Claire kept her head down. She went to class. She took notes. She cleaned floors. She made coffee. But she didn't stop waiting for an email, waiting for a knock, waiting for the moment the floor dropped out again. Professor Heller had said nothing, not in class, not outside it, not even a glance. And that, somehow, was worse. On the 4th day, she stayed after lecture, pretending to look for something in her bag. Heller packed up slowly, muttering under his breath about chalk dust and syllabus changes. Claire stepped closer. Professor Heller? He looked up, expression unreadable. Yes, Miss Donovan? I just wanted to say, I wasn't trying to compete with your submission. I didn't know. He tilted his head. Compete? That implies a comparison. She hesitated. I only meant... I'm aware of what you meant, he said coolly. Have a good afternoon. And just like that, she was dismissed, as if nothing had happened. Except something had. Later that night, Claire wandered into the student lounge in Building 5 to heat up a leftover sandwich. 2 graduate students were sitting near the microwave, whispering. I heard someone's paper got flagged, one said. Yeah, Heller's pissed. Says it's too polished to be real. From that undergrad? The one with the spelling error? Claire stood frozen, fingers tightening around her lunch container. She didn't say anything. Just left the lounge and walked until the wind cut through her coat. Back in her dorm, she opened her laptop. Nothing from the symposium yet, but rumors were already ahead of truth. She opened a blank document and typed, What do you do when they don't believe what you built? Then she deleted it, because she already knew the answer. On Sunday, her shift ended late. She was mopping the admin hallway again when she heard voices from inside room 3201, the faculty lounge. She knew that voice. Heller. She submitted early. No advisor, no prior work, no mentor, he said, voice low and sharp. That doesn't happen. Not here. Another voice replied, Klein's. But it did. It's too elegant, Heller snapped. It doesn't read like hers. Claire's stomach flipped. Are you saying she plagiarized? Klein asked calmly. I'm saying it should be reviewed. She submitted original notes, napkins, drafts, all consistent. They could be faked, Heller said. There was a pause. You just don't like that she got there first, Klein finally said. Claire stepped back from the door. Her hands were shaking. Again. Not because she was afraid of being wrong, but because she was right, and that scared them more. Claire didn't plan to work that Friday night. Her knees ached, her midterms loomed, and her fingers still bore pencil smudges from reworking a recursive loop she couldn't quite tame. But when the text came from facilities, need someone to cover midnight to 3, you in? She replied yes, because she needed something quiet, something hers, and MIT felt anything but. By 12:04 a.m., she was pushing a mop cart through the 3rd floor of the administration wing, fluorescent lights buzzing like a persistent question in her skull. Her ID badge, taped together at one corner, bounced against her lanyard. Her boots squeaked. She didn't mind. Noise felt honest. Outside room 318, she paused. Inside was the faculty mailroom, normally locked, but the door stood ajar. She peeked in. Empty. She rolled her cart closer, intending to close it, when her eyes caught something. A stack of letters in the outgoing tray. One envelope at the top bore a familiar name. 2. Symposium Committee. RE. Authorship. Verification request. Submission by Claire Donovan. The words stared at her like a dare. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her body knew before her brain caught up. Professor Heller had filed a formal request to challenge her paper. Her fingers trembled. She backed out of the room and pushed the cart too fast down the hallway, hands numb. At 1:03 a.m., Claire returned to Building 4. She didn't turn on the main lights. Just one desk lamp near the window where the janitor closet used to be. She sat down at the corner desk and pulled out her old spiral notebook. the same one with ramen stains and graph paper sketches. Then she opened to the back, her rawest work. Scribbles, chaos, math that breathed. She whispered aloud to herself, "What do you do when they doubt your voice?" Answer, you don't whisper, you write louder. The next day, she skipped her classes and walked across campus to the river lawn. Wind snapped through the branches of bare trees. Students in down jackets passed her with earbuds in and heads low. Claire sat on a stone bench, knees pulled to her chest. A professor from the mechanical engineering department walked by, nodded, didn't recognize her. She was used to that. Sometimes invisibility felt like protection, but today it burned. She pulled out her phone and opened her email. Subject line, urgent, academic integrity inquiry scheduled. From Dr. Miriam Hayes. Time, Monday, 2:30 p.m. Location, room 6 to 310. Bring all original documentation of your research. Claire's breath caught. Not because she was afraid of being wrong, but because she was exhausted from having to prove she wasn't. That Sunday night, she sat on the dorm floor surrounded by everything: spiral notebooks, cafe napkins with matrix notations, a coffee-stained index card where she'd first jotted the idea, a library printout with timestamps, and her battered laptop. It didn't look like scholarship, but it was hers. And now, she would carry it into a room full of doubt. She thought about not going. She thought about disappearing. Then she looked at the sealed envelope from her mother again. She placed it inside her bag, just in case she needed to remember who believed in her first. Claire stood in the hallway outside room 311, holding her architectural model as if it were a child made of paper and breath. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of failure, but from the silent prayer that someone, anyone, might see what she had tried to say. Inside the room, students buzzed around like bees in a mechanical hive. Models of all kinds cluttered the long tables: polished towers of acrylic, intricate 3D printed landscapes, structures suspended with fishing wire, glowing with LEDs. Claire's, by contrast, looked like a memory, crafted from cardboard, thin basswood, and strips of colored thread. The professor walked in, clapping once. Final reviews. 1 minute pitch, 2 minutes critique. Let's begin. One by one, students stood beside their models, speaking of environmental integrations, postmodern values, and economic sustainability. Every sentence felt rehearsed, like the sound of a well-oiled engine. When it was Claire's turn, she cleared her throat and stepped forward. "This is a memory shelter," she began. "It's modeled after the places people remember when they think of safety. It doesn't prioritize height or density. It prioritizes breathability, emotion, light." There was silence, then a chuckle. One of the students in the back, Miles, leaned in toward another and muttered something. A ripple of soft laughter followed. The professor crossed his arms. "You're suggesting subjective architecture?" Claire nodded. "I'm suggesting that function includes feeling, that there's more to shelter than walls." The professor stepped closer to her model. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. His silence was sharp enough. "No foundational grid." Claire hesitated. "No, it follows human movement, not imposed form." He turned to the class. "All right, let's move on." That was all. No feedback, no questions. She picked up her model and returned to her chair. The next presentation began, a girl named Isabel showing off a kinetic roof system that adjusted with the sun. But Claire couldn't hear. Not really. Her model sat beside her, quiet as a ghost. That night she stayed late in the studio. The other students had long since gone to bars or sleep or their glowing laptop screens. Claire took apart her model, not to destroy it, but to understand it better. She laid each piece on the table. She traced the curves she had built into the base, the thread lines that mimicked the rhythm of breath. She stared at it until the lines blurred into memory. Someone entered the room. It was Professor Halden. He was not her critique professor. He taught a different section. "I saw your model," he said simply. Claire looked up, unsure what to say. "I don't think it didn't work," he continued. "I think it worked too quietly." She blinked. "Quiet things don't last here." Halden smiled gently. "Not yet. But we're building the future, not echoing the present." He stepped closer, nodding toward the scattered pieces. "May I?" She nodded. He picked up a piece of basswood, held it to the light. "It breathes," he said. Claire exhaled for the first time in what felt like days. When he left, he didn't say goodbye, just placed the piece down and walked out, like a musician leaving a note to hang in the air. Claire gathered the pieces of her model again, not to hide them, but to begin again. Not louder, but clearer. Because maybe it wasn't about shining. Maybe it was about being seen. The envelope had waited long enough. Claire returned to her dorm after the review and dropped her bag by the desk without even taking off her coat. The room was still, afternoon sun slanting through half-closed blinds. Her roommate wasn't back yet. She stood for a moment, then reached into the drawer. The envelope sat just where it always had, its edges now slightly frayed from being touched but never opened. She sat down, placed it on the desk, and stared. Her mother's handwriting, soft, deliberate, was familiar even in its final form. Claire's fingers hovered. Then, slowly, she broke the seal. The letter was dated 3 days before her mother passed. "My Claire, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to see you grow into the world I knew you were already changing. I won't pretend to understand your math. I can barely fold a fitted sheet without your help. But I saw the way your eyes lit up when you found patterns. I saw how you wrote formulas on napkins at breakfast. I saw how you counted the stars like they could talk back. You've always seen the world differently. And that might make some people uncomfortable. They will mistake your quiet for weakness. They will call your honesty naive. Let them. Because what they can't take is the fire in your mind. Don't let fear silence you. Don't let them convince you to wait your turn. Your turn is every time you show up. And when you feel alone, really alone, remember, I saw you before anyone else did. Love always, Mom." Claire folded the letter back carefully, pressed it to her chest, and exhaled. Not relief, not even sadness, just a quiet clarity. She didn't need anyone's permission to belong. She already did. That night, Claire opened her email. The subject line read, MIT Undergraduate Math Symposium, Final Program Schedule. She clicked it. Her name was there. 3:00 p.m. Kresge Main Hall. Keynote. Claire Donovan. Topic: Nonlinear decomposition in recursive matrix structures. She stared at it for so long she forgot to blink. Her hands shook, not from nerves, but because for the first time, someone had written her name next to the word keynote. And meant it. Across the room, her battered backpack sat open, napkins and notebooks spilling from the side. She walked over, tucked the letter inside the front pocket, then zipped it shut. Because now, she knew what came next. She wouldn't just present. She would take the stage. Claire hadn't eaten since breakfast, but she wasn't hungry. She stood just behind the heavy doors of Kresge Main Hall, heart thudding in slow, deliberate beats. On the other side were rows of seats filling by the minute, chatter blending into a low murmur. She'd rehearsed the talk a dozen times, even whispered parts of it while wiping down tables at the cafe. But standing here now, her palms damp, she couldn't recall the first line. The projector crew checked the cables again. One of them handed her a small mic. "You're on in 3 minutes." Claire nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. She glanced around, searching for someone familiar, but all she saw were polished shoes, collared shirts, faces she didn't know. No Maya, no Dr. Hayes, no Professor Klein. But she wasn't alone. A soft cough behind her broke her thoughts. A boy, 12, maybe 13, stood near the stage wing, hoodie sleeves too long, a notebook clutched to his chest. He looked up. "Is it really you?" Claire blinked. "Sorry?" "You're the one with the chalk loops, right? In the lab. I used to sit outside your window." Something in Claire softened. "You watched?" The boy nodded quickly. "I'm Elijah." He hesitated, then added, "I want to be like you." Claire crouched slightly to meet his eye level. "You don't have to be like me. Just don't stop being curious." He smiled nervously. "You're not nervous?" "I am," Claire whispered. "But I'm going to do it anyway." A voice called, "Miss Donovan, we're ready." Claire stood, smoothed her sweater, and stepped out into the light. The crowd was larger than she expected. Faculty lined the front rows. Students were packed in, some standing near the back, and near the door, quietly leaning against the frame, was Dr. Miriam Hayes. Claire adjusted the mic and cleared her throat. "Hi," she began. "I'm Claire Donovan. Some of you know me. Most don't. That's okay." She glanced once at the screen, then stepped away from her notes. "I used to clean this building, before I ever took a class in it. I used to scrub the corners of whiteboards where equations faded and names were forgotten. And I used to think brilliance belonged only to the loudest voices in the room." She paused. The audience leaned in. "But I've learned that sometimes the loudest discoveries are made in silence." The first slide appeared, a sketch of layered matrices drawn by hand, still faintly stained by coffee. "This is what recursion looked like to me. Not elegant, not textbook, but real, alive. A shape that unfolded when everything else in my life was closing in." Murmurs rippled across the auditorium. "I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have a grant. I had a mop, a notebook, and a question I couldn't let go." She clicked forward. Equations appeared, loops, shifts, a diagram she once drew at 2 a.m. in Building 4. As she spoke, her voice steadied, each line built on the last, logic spiraling upward, folding into itself. Recursive. "And I know there were doubts. I know not everyone believed I wrote this alone." She turned slightly. Her eyes landed briefly on Professor Heller seated in the third row. He didn't flinch. "But I did. And I stand here now not to prove that to you, but to prove it to myself." The final slide faded to white, 4 words written in chalk. "What patterns do you miss?" A pause, then applause. It started with Dr. Hayes, then students. Then the entire hall stood. Claire didn't smile. Not yet. But her shoulders relaxed. Her hands stopped shaking. In the back, Elijah clapped with both hands above his head. And Claire, for the first time, felt seen. not just for what she had survived, but for what she had created. After the keynote, Claire barely made it down the stage steps before the crowd surged forward, some with questions, others just to say, "Thank you." She answered what she could, smiled politely, but her eyes kept drifting toward the back, where Elijah had disappeared into the corridor. 10 minutes later, as the room emptied, she stepped out into the hallway. Students milled about, holding program booklets and coffee cups. But Elijah was nowhere. She turned a corner and found him sitting alone on the bench outside Lecture Hall B, hugging his notebook like armor. Claire approached quietly. "Hey." He looked up. "You did it." She smiled. "So did you. You showed up." He nodded slowly, then looked down at his shoes. "You meant it, right? What you said? That you used to clean?" Claire sat beside him. "Every Tuesday and Thursday night, sometimes Sundays, before anyone thought I belonged in a lecture hall." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not in any class. I sneak in sometimes. Listen through the door." Claire tilted her head. "You understand recursion?" "Some of it," Elijah whispered. "I don't know all the words, but the shapes make sense. Like breathing patterns." That made her chest ache in a way that was almost beautiful. She reached into her bag and pulled out a blank page from her notebook. She began sketching, a nested loop, then an arrow, then a simple base case. "Let's try something," she said. "Not a lesson, just ideas." Elijah scooted closer. "You're gonna teach me?" "No," Claire said softly. "We're going to think together." They spent nearly half an hour on that bench, sketching ideas, simplifying terms, laughing once when he spilled her pen on his hoodie. Eventually, he pulled something from his own notebook, a drawing. It was of a spiral, imperfect and hand-shaded. At the center, written in shaky but clear print, "I didn't give up because you didn't." Claire blinked fast. "Did you draw this for me?" Elijah shrugged. "I started it the day you left the lights on in the lab. I thought you were talking to someone, but you were alone. Still explaining things like someone was listening." Claire took the page with both hands. It trembled slightly. "I'll keep this," she said. "Always." That night, she posted a note on the MIT student bulletin board. "Open lab. No prerequisites. All questions welcome. Thursdays at 9. She didn't advertise it, didn't send a flyer, just left the door unlocked the next week. 4 people came, then 6, then 10. Some were janitors, some were food service workers, some were undocumented high schoolers who just wanted to learn. They called it the loop. Claire called it the beginning. The envelope was cream-colored, thick, and without a return address. Claire found it in her campus mailbox on a Monday morning, wedged between a free newspaper and a flyer for discounted LSAT prep. She almost tossed it, until she saw her name printed in block serif letters. Claire Donovan, Building 4, Lab 2A. Inside was a folded letter on crisp stationery. She sat on the bench outside the math building and read it slowly, line by line. "The Applied Structures Fellowship Committee is pleased to invite Miss Claire Donovan to join our Emerging Scholars track. We offer full academic funding, year-round housing, a personal research stipend, and immediate placement in the Advanced Recursive Systems Group. We are prepared to waive all prior credit requirements. Start date, immediate." Claire stared at the paper. She read it twice, then a third time. By the fourth, the words blurred. She whispered, "What?" Students passed behind her, laughing. One tripped on the curb. A gust of wind tugged at her hair, but Claire sat still. The Emerging Scholars track wasn't just an opportunity. It was legendary. Invitation only. Whispered about in elevators. Rumored to skip applicants straight into doctoral programs or launch them into careers at Jet Propulsion Labs and Fermilab. And now they wanted her. That evening, she found herself walking without purpose, letting her steps guide her through campus. She passed the chalkboard hallway, once covered in tangled proofs and late-night musings. Someone had cleaned it. It was empty now, sterile, all except for one small message in chalk. "What if I'm not ready?" She paused, then pulled a piece of chalk from her coat pocket, the same one she always carried, and wrote beneath it, "If you're asking, you already are." By the time she returned to her lab, the room was dim but not dark. Someone had left the desk light on. 4 students were already waiting, one in a delivery uniform, one still wearing a dorm dining apron, one with no backpack at all, and Elijah, who sat quietly, flipping through a borrowed notebook. Claire walked in, nodding. "Sorry, I'm late." "You're not," Elijah said. "We just came early." She smiled. As they began to work, questions scribbled, theories debated, she felt it again, belonging. Not in the system, but outside it. Around a table, among minds that weren't polished but were burning. After they left, Claire sat alone. She pulled out the letter again, folded and unfolded it until the corners softened. Then she picked up a pen and wrote her reply. "Thank you for the offer. I am honored. But I've already accepted another role." She didn't sign it right away. She just stared at the page. Because her lab didn't come with a stipend or prestige, but it came with open doors, and kids who dared to ask, and that, to her, felt like the future. The following Thursday, Claire arrived early. The lab smelled faintly of dry erase markers and warm dust, like it always did before the world walked in. She set out a few extra chairs, not because she expected more people, but because something in her hoped they'd come. By 8:52 p.m., the door creaked open. Elijah entered first, hoodie sleeves rolled up, notebook under one arm. Behind him came 2 new faces, a girl wearing a worn MIT sweatshirt and a boy who looked like he'd borrowed his brother's backpack. Claire smiled. "Come in." By 9:10, every chair was full. Someone brought snacks. Someone else brought a question that no one could answer. That didn't matter. They stayed until the clock hit midnight. And when they left, they thanked her, not for the math, but for the light. That night, Claire stayed behind to erase the board. But she left the last corner untouched. There, in looping script, she wrote, "If you're reading this, you're ready." She drew a spiral around the words. A loop. Not perfect, but whole. As she gathered her things, a knock echoed from the hallway. She opened the door to find a grad assistant holding a thick envelope. "No return address," he said. "It just says Claire." She opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, typed. "I sat outside your lab once. You never saw me. But I saw you. I applied. I got in. I'm scared, but I'm coming. Thank you for leaving the light on." Claire pressed the letter to her chest, smiled softly, and turned off the lights. The board still glowed faintly with chalk residue. Outside, spring had begun to unfurl itself across the campus, subtle but certain. And deep inside Building 4, in a room that once held nothing but silence, something was growing. A loop, a light, a place to begin. The end.